That's incredible. Great job leading there. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and so love your pastor. Jim's incredible. You know that. He's homegrown. But I have the opportunity to go from New Mexico to Maine to Florida to California, and you have absolutely one of the finest young pastors in all of the SBC. And I just want to, I hope you know that. I was anxious to get here just to see this church and see you, because I want to know the reason that he said no to so many other churches and stay here. It's just an incredible opportunity to be here. Hey, Mark chapter 2 is where we're going to be in just a moment. Mark chapter 2, verse 1 through 12. Before I get to that, if it's okay, I'd like to introduce my family. I wasn't able to bring them with me, but it helps you get a little idea of where I'm coming from and my context, if you will. I'll go real fast. There's a lot of them, all right? I've got 6 kids. That's my wife to my right as you face it, Lynette, and we've been married for over 32 years. And then our oldest daughter is in the middle there, Anna and Shelly are our 2 oldest. They each are married, but we'll skip the husbands. And then my oldest son is in the back right. He's a senior at California Baptist University out in Riverside, California. And then God blessed us with a whole second phase of children. And the very first child we adopted was Libby. She's in the back right there. She's from China. We adopted her when she was 1. They found Libby in a shoebox outside of a police station and took her in, and we got her when she was 1, and she just turned 16, and she's driving on her own around Georgia, just so you know. And then Michael Lynn, she's in the front left there. She's from Ethiopia. We got her when she was 3, and she's now 14. And now she's got a special gift of bossiness, you know. Well, when we moved, I was pastor, and then I've been at the North American Mission Board for about 7 years. We moved to Alpharetta, Georgia, and she went into our neighbor's house and put her hand on her hip and said, you people have issues. And they started laughing. They was like, do what? And she said, your house is a mess. You have issues. And we had to set her down and say, look, sweetheart, we're trying to make friends, and you're not helping, okay? So don't do that. But that's Michael Lynn. And then J.M. is in the middle back. There's 4 grandkids all thrown in there as well. But J.M., John Michael, he goes by J.M. He's from the Philippines. And we adopted J.M. when he was 12. He's now 19. He's going to college on Saturday. He's 5'6", got a basketball scholarship to Truett McConnell here in Georgia. So he's all excited. And so we have 6 kids from 4 different countries. And so when people see us walk into a restaurant, they're normally like, how did that happen? You know? Or in the South, they'll go, well, bless your heart. And I know what that means. That means better you than me. And I tell folks, there's no need to bless my heart. I'm just very competitive. And no, what I mean is we have 6 kids from 4 different countries. When we watch the Olympics, we win, all right? We do. Now, interesting thing, I'd love to tell a story about J.M. When we went to pick up J.M. is it all right to move around? Okay, some Baptists are a little nervous about you moving around, all right. But when we went to pick up J.M., they said, now be very careful with him. He's not used to some of the same luxuries that you're used to. And I was like, well, luxuries, what are you talking about? And they said, well, hot water. They found J.M. wandering the streets when he was 5 and sleeping in the back of a pickup truck. And so he took him to the orphanage, and he lived in that orphanage for 7 years till he was 12, and they didn't have hot water. They basically took sink baths all that time. And so they said, just look, when you go back to the hotel, make sure he doesn't harm himself with hot water. And just explain it to him, he'll be fine. And so we go back to the hotel. You can imagine your very first night with your new family. He's bouncing around the hotel. He thinks this is the greatest thing, you know. And then it came time for bath time. I said, J.M., come here, buddy. I want to show you something. And so we go in the bathroom, and I turn on the water lukewarm, and then I take his hand. I said, let me have your hand. And I put his hand underneath the lukewarm water, and I said, watch this. And I just gradually turned the water warmer and warmer and warmer until he began to feel hot water for the very first time. And I'll never forget the look on his eyes when he said, those big brown Filipino eyes, he says, that is wonderful. And I said, it is wonderful. You're going to love it. And I said, now look, I'm going to go in there, and you take off your clothes and jump in the shower. He said, shower? What's a shower? Well, I just wasn't thinking. I mean, he had pretty good English. They taught him English, but they didn't have a shower, so how would he know what a shower was? So I had to explain a shower to him. Have you ever explained a shower to somebody? It's not that easy, okay? It's like water from heaven, son. You're going to love it. Trust me. It's just those things you don't think about. It's like the first time I took him out to eat. The very first time we went out to eat, I said, here, buddy, I'll order for you. He'd never been out to eat. And so I said, just bring him some chicken fingers. He's like, no, I not eat chicken fingers. No, I not eat. I said, no, son, they're not chicken fingers. That's just what they call them. He said, well, why do they call them that? I was like, I don't know. Just eat them, all right? There's barbecue sauce. It's fine. You can only imagine the first time we had buffalo wings. I mean, it's always an explanation at my house. But, I'll never forget when I went to bed that night thinking of how excited he was. When he came back out of that shower 30, 45 minutes later, all shriveled up, very excited, though, about hot water. And still to this day, 7 years later, he's taking a shower, he's singing and loves, and he's never forgotten the privilege of hot water. Something really sweet and special about that, because on the first night I thought, how many 12-year-olds are that excited about hot water? They're just not. I mean, we're typically pretty spoiled people. We really are, And, sir, what's your name? Chris. Sorry to interrupt you from sleep, Chris. Hey, Chris, just give me 2 minutes. You can go right back to sleep. It's no problem. Hey, Chris, seriously, I picked you because you look the cleanest one in this section. So, Chris, tell me, now, you've taken a shower in the last 2 or 3 days. All right, good. Well, tell me, when you took a shower, just be honest, and you felt that hot water, did you like, yes, hot water? Did you do that? You didn't do that? You see, folks, Chris, he's what's wrong with America, all right? Now, I'm just joking, sort of. But the problem is, none of us really thought about that. We just don't think about it. Why? Because we get used to it. You're sitting on padded pews in an environmentally controlled room. We just get used to so many things that we just don't think twice about it. And that's the same way it happens when it comes to churches. And at the North American Mission Board, what we do, we come alongside churches like yours and try to plant churches. Our goal is to plant 1,200 a year. That's 100 a month. That's every Sunday you worship, 20 to 25 churches on average will be launched. Isn't that incredible? We come alongside churches like you to do that. Sometimes people say, well, is there really a need for more churches? Is there really a need for it? And they'll think, well, it seems like we've got a lot of churches. It's because it's not like it is here everywhere else. Sometimes when it comes to hot water, it comes to food, we don't think twice about those things. But you know what? It's not like it is here everywhere else. And when it comes to churches, same thing. In Mississippi, it's the most church state in all of North America. In Mississippi, there's one Southern Baptist church for every 1,392 people. And you say, well, what about Georgia? I knew you'd ask. In Georgia, there's one for every 2,793. Now, what's interesting about that is missiologists say that you need one church for every 2,000 people if you're really going to adequately reach a community. So there's still a need for more. And as you know, even in Georgia, so many of the churches here are starting to sink and go belly up, if you will. They need to be revitalized by churches like yours. But what's that look like compared to, say, let's just pick out some, say, like New York. In New York, there's one for every 58,000. In New Jersey, one for every 64,000. And in Canada, there's one for every 103,000. My point is this. Where we're trying to focus on planting churches around large cities, 85% of North America live in and around large cities. In the Northeast, Midwest, West, and Canada. The majority of Southern Baptists, almost 90%, live in the SEC and the ACC. It's the other conferences that are going to hell, and we've got to reach them, all right? So that is why we're trying to plant churches in these very strategic locations, because it's not like it is here everywhere else. Now, tonight I want to look in Mark chapter 2, a story that I love because of some of the characters in the story and what the Lord does through them. I love the Gospel of Mark because Mark is, He's never been officially diagnosed, but Mark, I believe, has an attention disorder. All right? Because if you read the Gospel of Mark, he'll go for about 5 or 10 verses, and then boom, he changes the subject. He'll go for another 5 or 10 verses, and boom, he changes the subject. I mean, just completely out of the way. And then when he tells a story, he just skips. It's like taking a rock and skipping on a pond. He just skips along. If you want details in the Gospels, you got to go to John or Luke or Matthew. You don't typically. Mark, he's flying at 30,000 feet. Now, the reason I like him so well is I'm the same way. My wife gets on to me all the time. She'll say, hey, did so-and-so have a baby? And I'll say, yeah, they had their baby. Boy or girl? I was like, it was a baby. All right, it was a baby. I don't know, it was a baby. I don't know, boy or girl. I just don't know how much it weighed. It was a baby. All right? And that's how Mark does. So when he tells a story here, he flies by at 30,000 feet. That's not saying there's not a lot of other things going on in the details. There are. But he just tells us the main points. So let's remember that as we read through this, as Mark flies through the story. I want to read through it, come back, and then let's just walk through, all right? Starting in verse 1, it says this. And when he, that means Jesus, returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. And many were gathered together so that there was no more room, not even at the door, and he was preaching the word to them. And they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, remember that part, son, your sins are forgiven. Now, some of the scribes were sitting there questioning in their hearts. I always get a kick out of this particular verse. Every church I pastored had people like this. They would sit there thinking to themselves. I had some people thought that criticism was a spiritual gift, and that's kind of what these guys are like. Well, what does this man speak like? What does this man speak like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves, he knew what they were thinking, said to them, why do you question these things in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, rise, take up your bed and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And he said to the paralytic, I say to you, rise, pick up your bed and go home. And he arose, immediately picked up his bed and went out before them all, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, now help me with this last phrase. You ready? We never. Oh, no, my word. I've gone to Georgia games, and I know you guys can, you got more oomph than that, all right? I know it's Sunday night, and if it's really game time, you got to pump it up a bit. Let's try it one more time, just a little bit more energy. Here we go. We never saw anything like this. They left there saying, we've never seen anything like this before. That's an easy phrase for me because I'm going to admit right here at the start, I'm a Kentucky fan, okay? And during football season, we say that all the time. Every time we score a touchdown, we've never seen anything like this before. That's exactly. Can you imagine, though, leaving church and they said, we never seen anything like this before? Well, let's back up and walk through the story, okay? Because Mark flies through it. He says, they're in the house. Jesus is in the house. The house is packed, and he's preaching the word to them. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, there's at least one guy that has an idea. One guy has an idea of, hey, I heard Jesus is in town. And I heard what Jesus has done in other towns and how he's healed people. And, hey, look, our friend, I'm sure he called him by name. Mark doesn't because, Mark doesn't do details. I'm sure this guy called him by name and said, our friend, the one that the paralytic, if we could get him to Jesus, Jesus could change his life. And hey, what about, would you help me? Will you help me? We know at least he got three others to help him because he was carried by 4 men. So they all meet at a certain time, a certain place, and they go to his house, they pick him up, and now they're carrying him to where Jesus is. Mark skipped all that, but that obviously had to happen because here they come carrying by 4 men. They get there, and then something happened that they weren't counting on. It says, Mark says the place was packed. Now I get a kick out of this because Mark says the place was packed. They get there. They take him to the roof. They dig a hole in the roof. They lower him to Jesus, and Jesus heals him. Mark acts like this happens every Sunday. I mean, Mark acts like, in the bulletin, there's songs, special music, dig a hole in roof, sermon. He's just like, every Sunday, this is no big deal. No. It happened like this, I'm sure. They get there, the place is packed. What's the logical thing for them to do? There's no seats. They have a little huddle, I'm sure that between themselves, they're like, hey, what should we do? We weren't anticipating it being packed like this. Psychologists tell us that 1 out of every 4 people tend to be negative. All right? Don't point. But 1 out of every 4 tend to be negative. They're kind of like an Eeyore. They like round down, like it's a cloudy day. That kind of a person. I'm sure one of those 4 was probably an Eeyore type that rounded down. We should have come to the morning service, or, I'm sure they had some type of negativity they threw in there. We don't know all that went on there. We don't. But we do know at least one person threw out an idea. At least one person says, hey, fellas, I got an idea. Now, here's what we're going to do. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take him and put him on the roof. I can't help but think at that moment, the paralytic probably propped himself up and was like, do what? And it's like, no, it's going to be okay. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take you, put you on the roof. We're going to kind of guess where we think Jesus is. And then we're going to dig a hole, a big hole, and then we're going to lower you down to where Jesus is, and he's going to heal you. I'm sure one of those guys probably says, but we've never done it that way before. That's exactly what they do. So they get him up on the roof. They dig a hole in the roof. And they lower him down. Can you only imagine? Sometimes we read through these stories and we think about what would it be like to actually be there. Can you imagine next Sunday? I don't know, Jim's very articulate, and I've watched your services online, and he's got a silver, that silver tongue, just everything flows together. He's dressed to a hilt. He's got everything in place. Right in the middle of that sermon, halfway through, what if next week some dust begins to fall? Some more dust begins to fall. And all of a sudden, a hand comes through that roof. I don't care how good he does preach. I'm watching that, all right? But all of a sudden, a hand comes to the roof, another hand. Jesus is teaching the word to them, preaching the word to them. And these guys are digging, pulling a hole, making a hole. All of a sudden, a small hole and a bigger hole. You can just imagine some of the side conversations. I bet it's the youth ministry. It's the youth ministry. We always blame on the youth ministry. They're the ones we always kick. And so, big hole. And then all of a sudden, they begin, you can imagine 4 heads all look down, Lower him down, Cletus, and they lower him down. And then Jesus, remember what it said in Scripture? He said, Jesus, seeing their faith, decided to heal him. Jesus, seeing their faith, decided to heal him. You know what I love about this story? Several things. It's these 4 guys. The 4 guys that carried the paralytic. Did you kiss their names? No, because it's not in there. It's not. We don't know their names, but we know the passion of their heart. The theme of their heart. You can tell. It's whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. To be inconvenienced, go out of our way to go pick him up and carry him there. Hey, no problem. We're going to do whatever it takes. They get there, place is packed. We came here to give him to Jesus. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to have to do something we've never done before. It doesn't matter. We're going to do whatever it takes to get him to Jesus. And they put him up on the roof to dig a hole in the roof. Doesn't matter. We're going to do whatever it takes to get him to Jesus. You know what I love about these guys? Is their passion and the tenacity they have to do what? To get their friend to Jesus. To do whatever it takes. God has called us to do whatever it takes. We have a limited amount of time on this earth. And God put you here to do more than draw a breath and draw a salary. He put us here to do whatever it takes to get people to Jesus. That's the reason we plant churches in places where there are none. That's the reason you send missionaries all over the world. Because we're determined to do whatever it takes. Then I love the rest of the story, how they lower him to Jesus. Jesus, seeing their faith, heals him. And then what happens? Jesus heals a paralytic, and what happens? There's some religious people in the service that get ticked off about it. Isn't that typical? When God moves in an incredible way, when Jesus does something really special, there's somebody ticked off about it, upset. Hey, who does he think he is? Who does he think he is to have the ability to do that? And Jesus said, look, I have the authority on earth to forgive sins. You know what he was saying? hey, fellas, I'm going to heal this guy. I'm going to heal him physically, but honestly, that's no big deal. I've done bigger things, and I will do bigger things, but I'm going to heal this guy. But I have the authority on earth to forgive sins. I'm going to heal him physically, but I have the authority to do something spiritually that goes far beyond any lifetime on this earth. I have the authority on this earth to forgive sins. He was trying to help them see, look, I have the authority to do this, but something far greater, and that's to forgive your sins. I think it's a beautiful picture of how desperate people are for Christ. And I'm convinced people are more open to hearing the gospel than we are open to sharing the gospel. And these guys are passionate about getting their friend to Jesus, and then Jesus heals them. And then what does he say? This is how I get a kick out of Mark. Every time I read this, I just laugh, because Mark says, all right, he took his mat and went home. You know what else happened? No, because Mark doesn't say. He just moves on to the next story. That's it. He's done. He moves on. He went home. Can you imagine? Look, the guy was a paralytic. They came, picked him up, and took him to where Jesus was. He was carried out of there, but now he comes home with a mat underneath his arm. You think he just walked in and said, hey, what's for supper? No. Can you imagine the celebration that went on? Like, what happened? What happened to you? I can only imagine the response would be somewhat similar to what the blind man said when he said, hey, all I know is I once was blind and now I see, and the one that made the difference was Jesus. All I know is I couldn't walk, now I can. Only one that made the difference, Jesus. I don't understand it all. I can't explain it all. I can't draw you a diagram or anything else. All I know is Jesus made the difference. All the songs we sang tonight, all you shared about today, it's all about seeing people come to know Christ. Whatever it takes. I just beg you, as you live this life, it can be very difficult. Bad things happen to good people, challenging things happen, life throws us curveballs. But God put you here for a reason, and it's to make a difference. And we're to do whatever it takes. That's what our purpose in life is. It's not building a business. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not just teaching a class or a school. There's nothing wrong. Those are all good things. But understand, that's just where God's placed you on his mission field so you can impact your sphere of influence. I was in Cuba not long ago. And actually, I was in Cuba when Castro was still living, okay? And you say, Cuba, well, you may not be aware of this, but do you know that you own the majority of the Baptist churches in Cuba? Literally hundreds of them. You own them. And the reason I know that is because the deeds to those churches are in the vault at the North American Mission Board. There's a seminary in Cuba that trains pastors. You own that. The deed of that's in our vault. There was a little lady named Annie Armstrong that went around and would purchase facilities, and they put churches in them. The largest church in Cuba, Calvary, is right downtown Havana. I've been there. That's where they have the big national convention. That was purchased by Annie Armstrong for about $30,000 years and years and years ago. It's an old theater. He turned it into a church. I was talking to these Cuban pastors, and they're so sweet. And they said, God is doing an incredible work in Cuba. He said, God has started a church planting movement in Cuba. Hundreds and hundreds of churches have been planted. I was like, well, tell me about it. And with tears in their eyes, they said, when Castro came to power, he came out with several rules and edicts. It says, no more churches, no more churches. It's the best Castro I can do, all right? No more churches. And what he meant was you cannot build any more churches. You can't even add on to a church. You can't add a bathroom onto a church. No more facilities, no more buildings. But you can meet in your homes. And so they began to do that. And they would just pack their homes, and so much so that his point, he was trying to spread them out. I'll dilute them, and they'll just evaporate away. I'll get rid of these people by just spreading them out. He said, all right, no more than 50, no more than 50. They do what? They said, no more than 50 in a house. That's the maximum amount you can have a house, government control. 50, but once you get to 50, you have to go to somebody else's house and start another one. Seriously? Seriously. That's exactly what they did. And you can only imagine what happened. They began to multiply and multiply, so much so he came out with a new edict and says, all right, no more than 25. No more than 25. When you get to 25, you have to go and start another one. He kept thinking, I'll keep spreading these people out, but he was doing exactly what needed to be done in order to start an incredible movement. And this pastor in Cuba, with tears in his eyes, he says, don't you understand? God started a church planting movement in Cuba, and he used a communist leader to do it. Isn't it incredible when what some people mean for evil, God can turn for good? When Castro was still living, I told him, look, if God ever allows me to pastor again, I'm going to get Castro to be my education minister. Because it would take a communist leader to get some people Sunday school classes to multiply. You know what I mean? Again, don't point. I love the passion that they had to do whatever it takes. Look, my point is this. Whatever neighborhood you live in, whatever school you attend, wherever you're working, wherever you're going to be next week or next month, God knows exactly where you are. And sometimes we take the presence of God and him knowing where we are as a sense of comfort that he, there's never anywhere we are that he doesn't know where we are. And we take that as a comfort. And that's okay. That's a good thing. But flip it and think about perhaps the reason. Look, he knows exactly where you are to strategically place you to be a missionary for him, to be a minister for him. Look, you read Corinthians, it says, we are his ambassadors. We are all his ambassadors, the ambassadors of Christ. Be on his behalf. He's sending you out strategically. You have a sphere of influence that no one else perhaps has. I wish I had the ability to x-ray every one of you in your influence x-ray. If we went around and just see who you influence in this city or in this state and all the influences, there'll be some overlap, but I guarantee you every person in here, you have a sphere of influence that God strategically placed you there for. You don't hire people to reach this city. You can't hire enough staff to do that. God's called you to do everything you can to reach this city. J.M., we were bringing J.M. On that same trip, bringing him home. After he took that 45-minute shower, it was literally 45 minutes. He still takes long showers. I'll never forget what happened. We let him hang out for just a little bit, then we were going to put him to bed. And again, he's 12 years old, first night together as a family. And so he reaches up and he hugs me really, really tight, and he says, I love you, Dad. And that's the first time we'd ever heard him say that. And I said, well, Man, I love you too, J.M. Then he did something I'll never forget. I tell it everywhere I go. He took his little hands and he pushed in on my cheeks like this, really hard. And he just looked at me. And it was really awkward. I didn't know I didn't know what to do. I think, in my word, I wish I listened to the orientation. You know, maybe this is a Filipino custom, and I'm supposed to do it back to him. You know, I didn't know. I really didn't know what to do next, and he just pushed in a little harder. And I said, "What's up, buddy?" And I realized he's just trying to get me to focus right on him. And so I said, "What's up, JM?" And again, with those big brown Filipino eyes, he said, I will be a good son for you. Oh, my heart melted. I'm sorry. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to be a good dad for you. I promise. And you go to bed. We said our prayers and went to bed. Next morning, 4 a.m. His face is right here. Good morning, Dad. I'm like, whoa. In case you did not know, bad breath is universal, all right? It is bad. It's like, hey, buddy. He said, I'll be a good son for you today. And I said, well, good. Now, why don't you go on back to bed, all right? I mean, you say 4 a.m, yeah, it's crazy. They would get the kids up in the orphanage at 4. They would do chores from 4 to 5, have breakfast from 5 to 5:30, and go to school at 6. I mean, it was incredible. Chris, what time did you get up this morning, man? Yeah. Don't lie, it's church. Don't be lying, all right? Problem with America, right here, all right? Just so you know. In case you're considering adoption or something, I just want you to know, all our kids came very disciplined, but look, do not let that upset you or anything like that at all. Because it didn't take but just a few months being around your biological kids, they become just as lazy as they are. They really do. They blend in really fast. It's not a problem. That night, same thing. I'll be a good son for you. Next morning, same thing. That night, same thing. So much so that I told my wife, look, this is a problem. He thinks he has to earn the right to be in our family every day. And so we had to sit down and have a little family talk. And I said, hey, now, James, listen. God put you in our family, in our forever family. Forever. Now, that means whether you're good or whether you're bad. We prefer good. But either way, you're going to be part of our family. It's not based on how good or bad you act. He said, okay, but I'll be a good son. I said, I know. But just so you know. It took him months to quit doing that. But I thought that night when I went to bed, I thought, I know, and we know, Ephesians tells us that we are saved by the grace of God. For by grace are you saved, not of works, lest any man should boast. James tells us that's true, but if you're saved, you are going to put some action to that, and you're going to naturally want to serve and be obedient. I couldn't help but think of what would it be like if every believer, every night when they went to bed, looked into their Heavenly Father's face and says, I will be a good son or daughter for you. Every morning. Hey, this morning, I got a lot going today, but the most important thing I have going is to be a good son or a daughter for you. It's all about being obedient. I'm so thankful God's placed you where He's placed you. We're all going to be in different places tomorrow morning. But I want you to know God knows exactly where you're going to be, and He's putting you there strategic for you to minister on His behalf. Gypsy Smith was an old evangelist, and he was asked, how do you start revival? He said, it's really simple. Simple? Oh, yeah, it's real simple. He said, you get a piece of chalk. A piece of chalk? A piece of chalk. And you get a piece of chalk, and you go into a room all by yourself. All by yourself? All by yourself. And you take that piece of chalk, and you draw a circle on the floor. And then you get down on your knees in that circle and pray that God would start a revival in that circle.